And for more on this, I'm joined by U.S. Congressional candidate Dan O'Connor. Welcome to the show, Dan. So we just saw this starkly different existence for people living just miles apart. What does this say about the state of the U.S. today?
Right. Liz, thanks a lot for having me on. I think it's a really important topic here in the U.S. I think everyone is quite aware of it, and I think that it's something that is becoming more and more obvious, and it's becoming increasingly worse. And I think it tells us that the direction that we've been going in for a long time is a complete failure. The U.S. federal government really actively became involved in the redistribution of wealth process about 100 years ago, and throughout that process we've seen the poverty level get greater, the more and more people poverty-stricken become greater, and the concentration of wealth in this country continues to go into the hands of the few.
And in the Bronx, as Anastasia reported there, 49% of children live below the poverty line. In the nation, it's 1 in 5. I mean, why don't we hear much discussion about this from our GOP presidential candidates, especially today, or the primaries are underway? Why aren't we hearing more about this from them?
It's a good question, and it's certainly something that should be brought up more often. The Republicans in Washington, generally, they embrace this system. They endorse this system. They call it capitalism, even though it really isn't. It's crony capitalism. I'm running for U.S. Congress as a Democrat here in New York City. I'm originally from New York City. I can see it firsthand. I can see the tremendous amount of poverty that exists in this city, and also, you know, when you talk about the Republicans running for office right now, they've even been asked about this a few times. Mitt Romney doesn't even really want to acknowledge it as a serious problem. The Democrats, we do acknowledge this being a serious problem. However, a lot of the Democrats in Washington, D.C. continue to think that they can solve the problem. I'm running as a Democrat. I acknowledge that this is a serious problem, but I don't think that the politicians can solve it.
Well, how can we solve it then? How can we reverse this trend that is rising here in the U.S.?
Sure. Well, as I originally mentioned, I think more and more people are becoming aware of this. More and more people are out of jobs. More and more people are genuinely concerned about the economy right now, given the atrocious economic conditions for many, many years. More and more people are genuinely concerned. The internet is a great source of information in helping to move beyond the mainstream media debate, who wants to talk about things like, you know, Mitt Romney's time spent at Bain Capital, which I personally don't care about. I am concerned about the people in this country who are poverty-stricken. And, you know, we're in the midst of a revolution in this country. It's gradual, it's growing, and I'm happy to be part of it, running for Congress here in New York.
You just said we're on the midst of a revolution. That's a very strong word there. Why do you say that, and what are the signs that it's happening?
Well, Occupy Wall Street's big. I've been engaged in it, and I've gone down there myself. My district borders on Wall Street. These people are outraged. Even the Tea Party movement, you know, they criticize the bailouts, the trillions of dollars to the large banks and the corporations. The Occupy Wall Street people also criticize this, and everyone acknowledges that there's a serious problem out there, and it's a system that favors the few, that favors the corporations, that favors the military-industrial complex. More and more Americans are becoming aware of it.
And well, you are running and hoping to address this problem. If elected, what would you do? I'd
be one of the few Democrats in Washington, D.C. that's willing to admit that we're bankrupt, and I would be one of the few Democrats in D.C. that is willing to admit that the politicians don't have all the solutions to the problems. We need to remove a lot of these functions from the hands of the politicians and the bureaucrats and allow people to solve their own problems. The example that we see in the Bronx is an exact perfect example of the failed war against drugs. This is a failed policy that's existed for many decades, and it's also a perfect example that the redistribution of wealth that Washington, D.C. continues to try to solve is essentially an enormous failure.
Dan, thank you so much for coming on the show. That was U.S. Congressional candidate Dan O'Connor.